A white bank manager refused to cash a check for a black client, humiliating her and insinuating suspicion about the source of her funds. What he didn't realize was that she owned the bank. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned observers. The story. First, let's start from the beginning. The day began like any other for Mr. James Whitaker, the manager of a prestigious downtown bank. The branch's gleaming white columns shone in the morning sunlight as he prepared for another routine day of handling wealthy clients and reaffirming his place in the financial world. That's when she walked in. Her tall stature and confident posture immediately drew the attention of several clients and staff members. Dressed in a sharp business suit and carrying a leather briefcase of undeniable quality, she approached the counter. "Good morning. I'd like to deposit this check into my account," she said calmly, handing the check to the young cashier. The cashier, a young woman named Emma, glanced at the amount and visibly tensed. It was a hefty six-figure check. Quickly regaining her composure, she directed the woman to the manager's office. "Ma'am, this is quite a large sum. We'll need you to speak with our manager," Emma whispered. The woman nodded, her expression unchanging, and headed toward the office. "Mr. Whitaker, there's a customer here with a large check," Emma informed him. James looked up from his documents, his expression darkening as soon as he saw the visitor. His years of banking experience told him that this client was not typical for his branch, but he masked his thoughts with a professional facade. "How can I help you?" he asked curtly, barely glancing at the woman. "I'm here to deposit this check into my account," she repeated calmly, placing the check on his desk. James slowly picked up the paper, scrutinizing it with barely concealed suspicion. "This is quite a large sum," he muttered. "I'll need to verify the source of these funds. It's standard procedure." "All the necessary documents and contacts are listed on the check," the woman replied, her tone steady. "You can contact my legal firm to confirm the transaction." "Even so, I'll need to delay this transaction for further verification," James replied reluctantly. "Perhaps you could provide additional evidence of your business's legitimacy." The woman furrowed her brows slightly, but kept her voice calm. "My business is fully compliant with the law. You have everything you need. I expect this transaction to be processed without delay." "I decide how and when things get processed here," James retorted, raising his voice slightly. His tone drew the attention of staff members, who subtly peeked from behind their desks. At this point, Emma intervened. "Mr. Whitaker, I've seen this client conduct large transactions with our bank before. Her name is familiar to me." "Emma, you're dismissed," James said coldly. Turning back to the client, he added, "If you'd like, you can file a complaint, but I have the right to investigate any check I deem suspicious." The woman sighed, maintaining her composure. "Very well then. I'll need to contact the bank's leadership. I believe they'll be interested in how you're conducting these investigations." James continued to scrutinize the check even though all the required documentation was in front of him. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. "Listen, miss," he deliberately refrained from using her name, though her documents were right in front of him. "I'm just doing my job. Verifications are mandatory for sums like these. I appreciate your concern for protocol, Mr. Whitaker, but I doubt this delay aligns with the bank's internal standards," she replied icily. Sensing the situation spiraling out of control, Emma made one last attempt to intervene. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm confident her account is in good standing. This client is one of the bank's major depositors." "Emma, you have enough of your own work to do. Get back to it," James cut her off sharply. Blushing, Emma cast a quick, apologetic glance at the client before retreating. Meanwhile, the woman was already on the phone, her tone calm but firm. "Yes, please connect me to the leadership team. It's urgent. I'm having an issue processing a check at one of your branches. Thank you." James grew wary but tried to maintain his composure. "Whoever you're calling," he began, "they'll tell you the same thing. Procedures require verification." At that moment, the office door swung open, and a sharply dressed, middle-aged woman entered. It was Laura Hastings, the bank's regional director. Her expression was a mix of irritation and professional severity. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her gaze sweeping the room. James stood up, visibly surprised. "Laura, I wasn't expecting you. We're just performing a routine check on a large transaction." James stood up, visibly surprised. "Laura, I wasn't expecting you. We're just performing a routine check on a large transaction." "A check?" Laura turned to the client, her expression softening instantly. "Miss Johnson, my apologies. I didn't know you were here. Is something wrong?" The client glanced at James, then back at Laura. Her voice remained steady but deliberate. "It seems Mr. Whitaker believes my check requires special scrutiny. Apparently, his concerns are not about the amount, but something else. Laura squinted, clearly catching the implication. James, you do understand who our clients are, don't you? Her tone turned icy. Of course, he muttered, visibly nervous. I just wanted to ensure everything was in order. That's enough, Laura interrupted. Miss Johnson, your transaction will be processed immediately. Please wait in the lounge. I'll personally oversee it. As the client left the office, her gaze lingered on James for a moment. The look in her eyes made it clear this wasn't over. James began, Laura, I was just... She silenced him with a raised hand. You just made a serious mistake, and there will be consequences. James paled, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control. In the conference room, Miss Johnson calmly reviewed her documents, while Laura assured her the matter would be resolved promptly. Meanwhile, James, left alone in his office, felt cold sweat trickling down his back. Later, in a meeting with the bank's leadership team, Miss Johnson addressed them firmly. Yesterday's incident wasn't just a mistake, it's a symptom of a deeper problem. As the largest shareholder in this bank, I consider it my responsibility to address this. She proposed concrete changes: mandatory staff training on inclusion, a review of procedures to eliminate bias, and a new internal complaints mechanism. The management team, led by Laura, agreed. Turning to James, Miss Johnson said, You understand you can't stay in your position after yesterday, don't you? James turned pale but said nothing. You'll be given a choice: resign with a letter of recommendation or face an internal investigation. I suggest you think carefully. Later that same day, Miss Johnson returned to the branch. Emma cautiously approached her. Miss Johnson, it's good to see you. Miss Johnson smiled. Emma, I noticed your courage when you tried to intervene. That's a valuable quality. If you're interested in advancing your career, reach out to me. I think the bank has room for employees like you. Emma blushed at the unexpected compliment. Clients and staff watched as Miss Johnson left the building with her head held high. This was no longer just her bank, it was a symbol of how one person could change an entire system.